Hello and welcome once again to Crazy Comics and Stories. It's me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. And at the other end of the series of tubes and wires that we call the internets is Joe, Crazy Writer. How you doing today, Joe?
I don't want to talk.
Well, we're going to have to.
This week sucked.
Yes, it has.
Make it stop.
Well, hopefully hopefully by the time people get to hear this, the week had stopped. But not a good week for comics.
Nope.
Not a good week for Minnesota comic fans.
No. Or country music fans.
Well,
even as we're sitting here, words coming through that Roy Clark passed away.
Well, now he'll be picking and grinning with Buck Owens in heaven.
Yesterday, when I was young.
Gloom, despair, and agony on me.
Oh. So, of course, we started the week all ready to sit down talking about previews.
Yep, we were. I had everything marked up. I had it all set.
I did too. There was fun things I was going to point out. And then word came down that Cory had to work overtime.
Well,
we're getting to him eventually, but we're going to listen to why we're recording this. We're coming to the party late.
Yes. Nope, we already knew I was going to be late, because on Monday I said, well, I can't record till 7:30, because we have mandatory overtime, and I have to stay till 6. So I won't get home till around 6:30, 7 o'clock. I'll want to shove some pie in my face before we record. And the first thing I saw on my Facebook feed Monday morning was a post in the Roy Thomas Appreciation Society. And Roy Thomas had actually stopped by to visit Stan Lee over the weekend. He had been to Stan's house on Saturday. And I was amazed that Stan and Roy, while they've done some work together, really haven't talked a lot over the last few years. But in the last year or so, they've started talking on the phone a lot more. And I guess Roy's agent said, hey, I've been talking to Stan's people. We'd really like to set up a visit for you and Stan sooner rather than later. So there was the picture of Roy and Stan together, and they said that they chatted for about a half hour. They talked shop, had a really good time. So I was really happy about that and was all ready to talk about it on the podcast Monday night. Joe, how about you?
I turned on the interwebs only to see that Stan Lee had passed away. And it basically lit up Facebook and everything as it, I think TMZ, as far as I can tell, was the first one to report it. And it just went like wildfire. And I was home. My wife was home because it was Veterans Day, so she had the day off. And it was kind of, it was weird because he was, how old was Stan when he passed away?
He was 95, going to be 96 in December.
So he's old. We knew it was coming. It was inevitable. We've just been having, I don't know, hit after hit. You know, Steve Ditko passed away. Just the older Vanguard are slowly leaving. And when Stan left, especially after all the hubbub about his whatever the hell was going on with his finances and people taking advantage of him or whatever, and I guess that was all straightened out, that really hit hard. Not as hard, though, as a local creator. And I just want to start talking with him because Stan Lee was hard. But one of our friends passed away that was a longtime friend and a member of the MCBA. A guy I tried to get on the podcast over and over. He just wasn't a podcast guy. And what would you call him? Creator, publisher, idea man, guy funny as hell.
He also was the first person to buy an ad on the podcast.
He was.
Yes.
We're
Back a
talking
long
about,
time ago when he had his international candy box subscription service. He bought an ad way back in the beginning.
we're talking about our friend David Watkins. He passed away November 6th, apparently of, I think, something heart related, which I never knew. And it was always one of those things where I always looked forward to seeing him at the con. He wasn't at the last MCBA con, and it may have been related. I don't know. He always had a joke or something going on. He used to do a handout called Abandoned Comics, if I'm remembering it right. I've got him down there, and just the funniest, craziest stuff. He would cut and paste and mash things together, and I always look forward to getting a copy. Eventually, he just did it online, and I always loved his methods of reviewing comics. And I actually did it for a while. I always talked about when I had Hot Comics, I had a newsletter, and I never badmouthed the comic. But when I started doing it, when Christy took over the shop, because I kept the email going, I would just cut into things like, if I didn't like it, don't read it. Don't like it, tried it, it's crap. And that's pretty much how David would review things. If he got to something he liked, you could tell it, because he might give it 2 sentences of appreciation. And that, Stan Lee passing was hard. Hearing about David passing away was kind of a gut punch. And that was all. On Monday, I was just done with the week. It was like, forget it. The week's over. And we talked with, I was in touch with Cory. We were trying to get the podcast rolling, and we're talking, we're 4 days away from the 12th when Stan Lee and Dave passed away. And I'm glad we didn't do the podcast on Monday, because I don't think I could have talked about anything, because I was just it was upsetting. And now with a little distance, I can stop and appreciate not only, I'm going to miss Dave like crazy, but also, I think we'll talk. I mean, what can we possibly say about Stan Lee? I mean, I've been listening, I've been reading all the stuff, and, his history's gone over and over. We've talked about Stan in the past, too. And I'm curious, Cory, what was your first recollection of Stan Lee?
Well, the first time I knew about Stan, I've talked in the past where when I started picking up Marvel Comics, I actually picked up reprints. I didn't realize they weren't new books. So 1975, I'm picking up Marvel's Greatest Comics and Marvel Tales, which was at the time reprinting the Fantastic Four at its peak, and Amazing Spider-Man around issue, I think the one I read was the Prowler, so that was late, either issue 68, 69, 70, around in there. So John Romita was at his peak, and I was just brought in by the drama, and Spider-Man, you had all the soap opera drama, and Fantastic Four, you had all this cosmic stuff going on, and the dialogue just kind of sang off the page. But then there was the Marvel Bullpen Bulletin page where, Stan's soapbox, more often than not, it was him shilling something that was coming out, but there was also a lot of, hey, Marvel's really cool, we're on the move, I'm giving talks at colleges. And it was, oh, wow, college kids don't read Richie Rich. College kids don't read the Disney books. This stuff's for college kids. This is cool. And then over the next year or so, reading the Bullpen Bulletins really sort of cemented his personality. And then when I read Origins of Marvel Comics, and I go back and I read it now, and he really didn't write much. They were just short introductions. But back then, it was really like Moses coming down with the Ten Commandments. It's like, oh, wow, he's talking about where these ideas came from and all that. And, Stan also would show up in comics from time to time. He was in Fantastic Four 176.
All right, and that's where I'm going to jump in because, Corey, you remember what my first Marvel comic was?
It was Spider-Man 178.
Yep, that was the one that got me on this crazy trail that we're still on. Before that, though, I would read whatever I could get a hold of. There was a kid down the block who had a bunch of Uncle Scrooge comics. That's where later on I discovered, okay, the ones I liked was Don Rosa or Carl Barks. The ones that were so-so weren't. My cousin, the one who gave me the Spider-Man for Christmas, had a Fantastic Four run. My other cousin, his brother, had a Conan run. So I basically went through that. And of course, there were hit or misses. He didn't have complete sets because back then, comic shops hadn't really popped up yet. And that's my first recollection of Stan Lee. And that's what cemented my brain in terms of what the bullpen was. And granted, as time went on, it was probably less and less that way. Especially nowadays, I don't even think people hang around Marvel much less because everything's done digitally. But that was my first recollection of Stan Lee. And from there, then I noticed, his name's on the comic. And then as I picked up the paperback books that had the reprints of Spider-Man and Fantastic Four in that's when I began to realize, he wrote for a while and then he stopped and, picked up an Overstreet Guide. I read a little bit more, learned a little bit more through Comic Buyer's Guide. And he kind of fell into place as, like you said, the Stan Lee character that we know and love. What was your first, did you actually physically meet him? What was your first time doing that?
I only met him once, and that was on the set of Mallrats. For those of you who don't know, Mallrats, Kevin Smith's second film, was filmed at the Eden Prairie Mall, which is a scant 9-point-some miles away from my house. And you all would know that because Joe's given you keys to my place. But I heard that they were going to have Stan Lee there. Actually, Dan Wiesemeyer spilled that information at Hot Comics one time when he came over. It's like, we're setting up the comic shop for this Kevin Smith movie, and Stan Lee is going to be in town, and blah, 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 blah. So I found out how to be an extra. Butch had been an extra, too. He and I were not extras at the same time, though, because I made sure to be there when Stan was there. And I was there for the 3 nights, and I have yet to see myself in the movie, even though I rode up and down that goddamn escalator.
It's the same way when Butch watches it, because he says, as they're cutting the scene, he's like, okay, me and Dave were over in that corner right there. And the film doesn't focus on them because the action was on the characters in front, but they were just kind of background people. Even when they did the end scene, when they were doing the big game show, they were there, but they can't even they don't remember where they were sitting.
Yeah.
Although they do the one big crowd shot, and they're more than likely probably in it.
But there was a break in the filming for a while, and a bunch of us nerds all gathered around Stan, who was holding court, and this was 1995. So,
I mean, I was the nice guy. I stayed and ran my shop and let all my employees go.
I wasn't an employee.
But you don't count. What counted was Butch and Mike and Dave and Jess and anybody else who were an actual employee. I stayed behind running the store. In hindsight, I probably should have said, you know what? Fuck it. It's Stan Lee. And go.
But Stan was holding court. And, he answered a lot of the questions that he always gets. And when it was my turn to ask a question, I was digging into the older Marvel stuff. And I said, Stan, there's an artist whose work I've seen in some of the reprints. And I've heard a little about him online, but I don't know much about him. What can you tell me about Joe Maneely? And Joe Maneely was one of the artists who worked at Marvel in the 50s. And if you go back, you can... I highly recommend for people to pick up the Yellow Claw / Black Knight Masterwork. Because the Yellow Claw series was Al Feldstein did the first issue and Kirby did the next 4. And Joe Maneely did all the art in The Black Knight. And it's probably a high watermark for the 50s Marvel stuff. But the Stan Lee character that he was kind of faded away. And he said, you know, Joe was one of these artists we had in the 50s. He was amazing. You know, he would just come in, and he was faster than Kirby. He was faster than Kirby, and his stuff was so good. And he told me, he said that, well, the story at the time was that a kid had fallen on the subway tracks, and Maneely climbed down, got the kid up, put him on the platform, and was hit by a subway train. Now it's pretty much assumed that Joe got hammered after all the artists at Atlas were laid off in when they had their crash, and he actually just fell onto the subway tracks and was hit by a train. But the Stan Lee, you know, the "hey, true believer" kind of faded away, and he started talking about his friend from the 50s. And he was like, well, how do you know about this artist? And I said, well, you know, I've seen the reprints, and there's an online discussion group of the stuff from Timely and Atlas, and his name comes up a lot. And Stan said, I'm really glad that people remember him. He was a fantastic artist and a good friend. So that is my meeting with Stan Lee. Joe, did you ever meet Stan?
I had 3 meetings with him.
Well, but what?
I know, I'm so good. Most of the time, though, the one that I didn't actually physically see him, again, this was me being nice, and I'll also confess a little bit at the end, but when Greenberg had his 2-day show at the Minneapolis Convention Center, again, this was back before Pat and I bought Hot Comics, so we were doing the Weekend Warrior thing. Greenberg did a monthly show. It was just a dealer show. He always, every so often, he'd have a guest. I've told the story before where Jay Lee showed up and just didn't know what the hell to do, and Butch kind of hung with him through the day, and we actually got to be friends. Well, I God knows if he remembers us now, but you know, we had a friendly day with him. It was kind of cool. At the 2-day show, Greenberg brought a lot of people in. I mean, he had Jim Lee, he had Stan Lee, he John Romita Jr. I mean, I'd have to go, oh, what the heck, my sketchbook's right here. I can let's see if I can find the where it starts, because I remember Butch kind of hung around. Oh, why can't I think of his name? Oh, Jim Lee, because Jim Lee wasn't doing sketches. You know, I always wanted a face sketch, but he wouldn't do a face sketch. And Butch kind of hung around. And then all of a sudden, there was like nobody around, and he just grabbed Butch's sketchbook and did a real quick Wolverine. Nothing like a Jim Lee sketch, which made me think that's probably why Jim Lee doesn't like to do sketches, because he probably takes his time and gets the art the way he wants it, as opposed to just a quick head sketch. And Butch is like, I don't remember that. And he goes, well, you got it, because I never did. All I've got is just a quick sketch. This is actually the dates I'm looking at are 91, and I'm looking through. I got Christopher Jones. I actually got Joe Monks and Joe Linsner back when you could actually have bought all of the pages he had for about $20 a piece. Who knew? John Romita Jr. was there. I got Jim Lee autograph, and then I got Stan Lee's autograph. Now, because Pat and I were there doing the con, it was kind of like, oh, go stand in line to meet Stan Lee. And I was kind of like, well, we really can't, because we don't have anybody to watch the table. Even though the con, it wasn't full of dealers, and it wasn't at all well attended. I mean, it was probably one of the last cons that Greenberg ever did in our town before he went away. Anyways, the comic I had Pat bring him was Fantasy Masterpieces #1, which I have here in my little hand. This is one of those Golden Age reprints that was published. Well, #1 here. Let's see, what's the date on it? 1966. So even then, Marvel was doing the reprinting, because they had the Marvel Age going, and so I figured, like we've said, they got all this stuff, And of course, one of the things that I've never seen talked about this week was how comic creators pretty much worked behind the scenes anonymously. And it was one of the big things that Stan came up with by giving limelight to the creators that were doing the artwork. So you read the cover here, fantasy masterpieces. See the old-time fantasy thrillers of your favorite Marvel artists dramatically recreated just for you. By Jolly Jack Kirby, I found the things from nowhere. By Sturdy Steve Ditko, those who change. By Jovial Joey Sinnott, I became a human robot. By Darling Dick Aries, I saw the other world. By Dashing Don Heck, beware the ghosts surround me. Also, don't miss the swinging intros by old Smiling Stan and his corny, candid photo, all on the inside. Nuff said. And you open up, it is a very young, very lack of mustache Stan Lee sitting on a chair as he's talking pretty much about all the artwork that they chose. And Pat took this in to have him autograph for me, and he told Stan, could you autograph this to Joe? And Stan's like, well, where's Joe? I said, well, he's watching my booth. Well, that was nice of him. He wrote, to Joe, a great guy, Stan Lee. No Excelsior, but that's one of the ones that's always going to be with me because I got it autographed by Stan. I think later that year at a question answer thing, I actually got to ask Stan a question about his relationship with Jack Kirby. I said, I kind of get you guys aren't really friendly anymore. And he goes, yeah, we're not. I feel terrible about it. Unfortunately, that was the last fucking question of the panel. So it was like, well, that kind of leaves everything on a downer.
There you go, Joe. Always, he's there with the needle to pop the balloon.
Pop the balloon. But my favorite encounter with Stan was at a Cap City show that Pat and I had gone to. And we were going down the hallway, and here is Stan Lee. And we're like, hey, Stan, can we get a quick photograph? Sure. And then Pat and I posed next to him. We asked the guy next to him, hey, would you take the picture for us? And Stan said something that didn't register with me right away. He took a picture, and I'm trying to get Pat to find that picture. I don't know if his ma has it. I don't think I have it, but it's just me, Stan in the middle. And we walk away. And then about an hour later, it occurred to me, the president of Marvel Comics took our picture with Stan Lee. And Stan Lee was like, it's not every day you get the president of Marvel Comics to take your picture. Did not even occur to me. And I was like, oh, my God, I should have gotten a picture with him. But what do you think the guy told Stan? I said, I'm running the company, and these kids are coming to get your picture. I mean, it kind of reminds me, and I think it was Adam that told the story where he finally got to meet Stan Lee. I've been waiting to see you all my life. Well, I'm sorry to keep you waiting, fanboy. I mean, Stan he had these responses ready to crack. And those were the three that I actually, saw Stan in person. One where I actually got to have my arm around him. And if I can find the picture, I've talked with Pat, I will post it because that's a keeper. I think it's lost. Back then everything was actual film, not like digital nowadays where I pretty much have everything. So those are my personal Stan run-ins. I will mention though, if you happen to have, you remember the Marvel Age that I talked about that had the Stan Lee interview that's never been reprinted?
Yes.
Number 41. There's a few people trying to do auctions on them. You might get them cheap, but don't even look.
Don't even bother.
Cory, you got your copy of Marvel Fumetti?
Yeah.
It's gone up.
Well,
it was $1 book yesterday. It's like $40-50 now and going up all the time.
And just of course, so people know, the picture of Stan in the Hulk outfit on the couch, that they just pasted Stan's head on that picture because that was Fabian Nicieza in the Hulk outfit. He,
if you want,
told that story online lately.
I actually have the original photo of Stan posing, and he's basically in the buff holding a copy of Batman versus Hulk.
Well, what it is, they were taking the pictures for the Fumetti book. And
the Fumetti book was basically like photo funnies. They were just Marvel taken around the Marvel offices, doing different shots of things, and they would put word balloons on it. It was all scripted, and of course the setup is that the women of Marvel Comics had just done something, and they were very proud of themselves. I remember Wheezy was there because she was hot. I can't remember the other women, and I looked for my copy of Marvel Fumetti. I'm not sure where it is. And Stan Lee comes in and goes, "Hey, gals, what do you know, I'm thinking about doing something." "What's that, Stan?" "I'm thinking about posing nude for a centerfold. What do you think?" And the women are all thinking, "Oh my God, we just topped it." "Yes, Stan, do it." And then you open the centerfold, and there's Stan's head on a Hulk outfit. "Nuff said." Whereas the original one was Stan posing on a couch. He could have been naked. We don't know.
He was.
Let's put it. Those Treasury size editions were mighty big. Well, and I had to laugh that he chose Batman Hulk.
Well, that was the only Treasury they had. What it was, they were taking the pictures, and they went and said, "Hey, Stan, let's do a centerfold." And, somebody had just said it as a joke. And within minutes, Stan had come back and was in his underwear. And they said, "Well, we'll cover you up with a comic." They handed him a comic. And he said, "Oh, hell no." Grabbed a Treasury. And
For those of you who have yet to see Stan in all his Treasury glory, I will post that picture on our Facebook page. Mainly because I've had it as a screenshot. It's funny, when I heard Stan pass away, that was the first picture I thought of. It's like, damn it, that to me is Stan in a T, just to have fun and do that. But that story of the Treasury is killer. Stan Lee and all his treasured glory. So if you haven't seen it or you haven't Googled it, go to our Facebook page and it's there.
I'd also like to point out, this was mentioned recently, Stan's last comic book work was in the Marvel 75th Anniversary comic, where he scripted an adaptation of the text story he did in Captain America Comics number 4, which was the first comic he wrote.
4 or 5?
I think it's 4. You'll have to look, but I'm pretty sure it's 4.
I will look, because I've got a trivia thing here where it says it's 5.
Oh,
and you know us, we are never inaccurate.
And I can also run to my bedroom and get the Captain America Omnibus, which would have it in it. But you look it up on the interwebs.
But the funny thing is I had that comic, and it was autographed by somebody. And, of course, when Stan Lee passed away, it sold.
Yeah.
And I had been sitting on it for so long, I would have sworn it never would have sold. And now I know why.
There is a wonderful symmetry. There's a lot of wonderful symmetry that has happened around Stan's life. But I think it's a wonderful symmetry that his first comic story and his last comic story were the same story. And there's now a lot of, I've seen people put up the picture that Roy and Stan took over on Saturday, and they'll say, this is the last picture of Stan Lee. I think it's wonderful that his last weekend he got to spend with his protege, Roy Thomas. And Roy has said that it was wonderful to just sit with Stan and talk shop. And they talked, they didn't talk about anything other than what it was like making comics. And one of the things that Roy has talked about in Alter Ego, Stan did a recording of some kind a few years ago. And he asked for Roy to be there because Stan's memory is so bad. He said, "I want Roy to be there to correct anything I say wrong." So Roy was kind of his right-hand man through the 60s. Roy was the one who took over Marvel when Stan moved up in the corporate chain. And I think that's kind of beautiful that Roy was there for his last weekend. I also want to point out that Stan started in comics at age 17. And he worked for Marvel pretty much from 1940, I think 1940? No, 41. Either 40 or 41 up until the late 90s when they finally had to end his contract due to the bankruptcy. I can't imagine working for the same company for 50 years. I just can't.
Well, it helps when your uncle owns it.
No, it really didn't.
Oh, I don't know.
Because
I stop and I think
we're not close.
I stop and I think about a guy like Stan, and then I stop and I think like a guy like David, who David was an idea guy, but he never really got the break he needed to get his ideas out there. I mean, he self-published for a while, and I know he went out to Hollywood to try to break into television, but he was always chugging away. I'm not saying Stan was handed anything, certainly not if you're aware of anything in his history, and like Cory alluded to, I mean, it was probably a minor miracle he was around long enough to launch the Marvel Age. I'm looking for my Overstreet price guide. I have no idea where the hell it went.
But another thing about
it, I don't have a dozen of the damn things lying around. I'm going to keep looking while you talk here.
When Stan started at Marvel, he was Stan Lee and Joe Simon's gopher. He would get paper and pencils, and he'd sharpen pencils, and they'd send him out to get coffee. And Jack always called him Stanley because Stan didn't much care for it. And Jack, in Jack later years, he didn't have a lot of nice things to say about Stan. But one of the things he said, and it reminds me that when we meet people, we kind of keep that image in our head. That whenever he thought of Stan, he thought about that annoying fucking kid who sat on top of the file cabinets playing a goddamn ocarina. Which is, the little... Stan would, if he didn't have anything to do, he'd just sit up there and play that thing. And Jack would get so mad he'd throw things at him to make him stop. And just think, 2 years later, Stan is the editor-in-chief of the company.
That damn kid.
Up until Roy Thomas took over, there were only 3 editor-in-chief at Marvel, and they weren't really called editor-in-chief. You had Joe Simon, and then when he left, it was Vince Fago and Stan Lee. And Vince did the funny animal stuff and the that stuff, and Stan did everything else. And when Stan was conscripted into the Army, he was in a small group of playwrights. And I think there were less than 10 people in that group. But he would be the guy who would, this group of playwrights would write movies and plays and other things like that for the soldiers. So when the soldiers would go overseas and they'd see the video about, don't get VD from those French women, Stan wrote that. Stan worked on that. And, think about where he started. And then before Marvel really took off, he was the editor. He talked a lot about the 2 different times he had to lay everybody off and how much that, he still carried that. I've read interviews even like 2-3 years ago where he would talk about that as being the worst times of his life.
Okay, here it is. A text filler. Captain America foils the Traitor's Revenge in Captain America Comics number 3 from 1941.
Number 3, okay. We were both wrong.
Yep.
By the 50s, the comics were just kind of barely holding on. And the people who worked in the other parts of Martin Goodman's empire, the ones who wrote for the men's magazines, the kind.
Captain America 5 was his first full comic strip.
But that text story in 3 is the one he did an adaptation of in Marvel's 75th anniversary.
So now that's going to sell out because Lord knows it didn't when it first came out.
But the guys who worked down in the smut mags would make fun of Stan. And that's one of the reasons why he said he wanted to get out of comics. He was tired of those assholes making fun of him for working on comic books. And then after Fantastic Four, within 5 years, the comic books were pulling in more money than the men's sweat magazines. And they were already on the decline. But I want to think, I've been talking with friends who, oh, it's so sad that Stan passed away. And all I could think is, here's a guy who started with nothing. He was, Martin Goodman was the rich side of the family. Stan's mom and dad were not. They were, I think they were Hungarian, and they really didn't have a lot, which is why Stan had to go to work so young. And by the 60s, he just wanted comics to be accepted as an art form. And the last 20 years of his life, he's a megastar. He's going on TV. He's in movies. He's probably the most well-known person to ever work in comics.
And now we're going to ask the Strode.
Uh-oh.
Which movie did Stan appear with his wife? The only time they appeared together on film.
Oh, gosh.
I'll make it easy. It was a Marvel movie.
I don't remember which one it was.
X-Men Apocalypse.
Oh.
That's the only time. I mean, and Cartoon Network, her voice was heard, but, that was just him playing with the Stripperella doll.
Right.
But that was the only time they actually appeared together.
And the Stan cameos actually were in the TV movies. Wasn't he in the Trial of the Incredible Hulk?
I think that might be his first one. That's the first one that comes up all the time. It's funny because I ran across a DVD today of, a couple days ago, that had the two really bad Captain America movies on it.
Oh, wow! I actually want those.
I will tell you where to get them. But we'll wait. We'll do that when we get to Freaking and Geeking.
But I don't want us to mourn Stan. The guy lived for 95 years. That's a good long life. He had a wonderful life. After a lot of struggle, he became the #1 guy in his field. And then he went out to California because he wanted his creations to be more than just throwaway comic books. And now they are. And he was 95. Not to make this a downer, but Roy Thomas said that Stan had talked about how, he thought it was time. He was tired. He was ready to go. So, Joe, what are your favorite Stan Lee stories or runs of comics?
Well, I do know he said if he could be one Marvel supervillain, he said he would want to be Doctor Doom. So, anyways.
Also, the whole favorite character thing, I love the fact that everybody, Stan said that Spider-Man was his favorite character. Whatever character you brought up was his favorite character. Okay?
You like Forbush Man, don't you? Oh, he was one of my favorites. I love writing him.
The one I remember is when I was reading Son of Origins, he talked about how Daredevil was his favorite character. And if you read those early Daredevil stories, you see why. Because they have that Stan goofy soap opera, wise-ass humor to them. Daredevil's going to trick his friends by pretending to be his own twin brother. That's the one thing that when I think of Stan, because I know the history so much, Stan loved writing the humor books so much. And he actually brought that into the superhero stuff. But if you want to see true, unadulterated dad joke Stan, read stuff like Millie the Model, when it became kind of a Archie knockoff. Any of the Archie knockoffs they did in the 50s, anytime he worked with Al Jaffe in the 50s, Stan was the dad joke machine. He loved that goofy, kind of wise-ass humor. And that's why Spider-Man's wisecracks. It was because Stan was like, well, he's got to say something. But Joe, what are your favorite Stan Lee stories?
I would have to say the early Spider-Man, because that's the one, and it may be because my first comic was the famous Spider-Man 178, but I always remember those fondly. I don't remember, and I've read them, the X-Men, the Avengers, Fantastic Four, but I do remember very vividly the Spider-Man comics. It could be because he was in high school, like I was at the time. I could see myself being him. He spoke to me because he didn't have two nickels to rub together. No matter what he did, it was going wrong. Spider-Man was kind of like the Charlie Brown of the Marvel Universe. It was just nothing went right for him. And the run I started reading, was the return of the third Goblin. And of course, it went into the 190s where everything started falling apart. His aunt died. His friends hated him. He tried to graduate, but he was one credit shy in a gym class of all things.
I loved that. That was Marv Wolfman really was good at that sort of thing.
Which I thought was funny because when I went to college, gym was an elective. It wasn't a requirement. But,
I had to take it. I took badminton.
I didn't have to take it. I took a few just to kind of do something other than study, and it was fun to break it out, the studying with some physical stuff. But I think that those would probably be my overall ones because, when Stan came back, he did the graphic novel with Jack Kirby, which was amazing, the Silver Surfer one. But even the other stuff, like the Stan Lee Presents in DC Comics or Imagines, kind of left me cold. I know it just wasn't quite what I was ready for. And I always did look forward to when Stan would write something. Usually it was like in an annual book, and I don't know which ones. I'm just picking like Spider-Man 700. Stan would have a quick backup story in that. But those early Spider-Men, they were definitely the memorable ones for me. How about yourself, Mr. Strode?
When I think of Stan Lee's writing, the one that comes to mind is his run of the Silver Surfer. That 18-issue run he did with John Buscema. Because Stan felt almost a weird proprietary love of the Silver Surfer, and even into the 70s, you had to ask Stan's special permission to use the character. And for years, they didn't do a Silver Surfer series because Stan kept saying, no, I'm the one who does the Silver Surfer series. So if you go back and you read, especially the first 17 issues, because the 18th issue was when he went to Kirby and said, this book ain't selling, we got to save it. And it's very different. But those 17 issues kind of show you Stan's philosophy toward life. Kind of this, people are kind of shitty now, but they could be wonderful. People could be good if they're just given a little push in the right direction. It has Stan's, I like to call it endless belly aching. Because that's one of the things the characters he loved did. They would complain. It's the thing, oh, I'm covered in rocks and I'm hideous and horrible. And the Silver Surfer's, oh, I'm trapped on Earth away from Shalabal. And there's something wonderfully melodramatic about that stuff. There was also a Silver Surfer graphic novel he did with Mobius that I go back and I read every few years because Mobius's art is amazing, and you could tell that Stan was inspired by it to kind of give it that he didn't go over the top. It was very much understated, and it showed that given the right circumstances, Stan could be a very subtle writer and a very almost dreamy writer in how he did that stuff. And those are the books that I think of when I think of Stan's writing. But really, you can't separate the fact that Stan Lee created this character that he became. He lived his gimmick. of the Stan Lee character. The, hey, true believer, enough said, Excelsior.
Now, did you look up the definition of Excelsior growing up?
Oh, of course.
Pulped wood products.
Yes. But it
I was
sounds
like,
great, doesn't it?
I'll buy it. Now it's actually down as a greeting.
Yes.
And I think it's a New York State motto.
Yes. But I think that's why Stan used it. It was the New York State motto. But still, he could say anything and we'd think it was cool. That was one of the things about Stan. He had this goofy honesty about that he was being a huckster. And he would flat out say, all right, here's the hard sell, true believer. One of the things I recommend people do is read the stories that comic creators are writing about him. Because all of the people who worked with him talk about how what a wonderful teacher he was. Mark Waid talked about how when he was in charge of Boom, and Boom put together a deal to publish some Stan Lee books, he thought Stan would just kind of be putting his name on them. But no, Stan came into the office and went over the art and was like, we need to change this, we need to do this, the story needs this. For all the talk about Stan as a writer, Stan, in my opinion, was the greatest editor in comics, period, end of statement. Because one of the things that is the controversy, oh, well, you know, he put his name on as writer even though he just gave the story outlines to the artist. That's what editors did back then. You listen to what Mort Weisinger would do. You would come in, you would pitch stories to him. He may take one, he may not. But there were times he would go, all right, here's the cover. You're going to write the book. You're going to draw the story. The editor would come up with the story and give it to the writer to write. Stan did that, except Martin Goodman was too goddamn cheap to have a writer to give the story to, so Stan had to do it. And you look at those early Marvel books, you know, it's, oh, Stan created this and Kirby created that. Stan was the editor. Stan was the one who took the stuff and said, all right, here's how to make it better. Here's what we're going to have on the cover. Stan was the editor. He was the art director. He was in charge of the office. He made sure people get paid. Because in the real early days, it was him and Flo Steinberg, and that's it. That was Marvel.
I've often said, you know, Stan and Jack and Steve and Don, they were akin to the Beatles,
yeah,
with John Lennon and Paul McCartney. What those two did in music together is equal what Stan and Kirby and Ditko and Heck did in Marvel Comics. And when they were apart, yeah, there was some good ideas. They weren't great. They're not well remembered. I mean, I talk about finding Kirby stuff later at DC. Oh, Jack, and you know, to this day, there's some stuff in the New Gods I still don't get what he was trying to do. The artwork's beautiful, but it wasn't. There was just a magic in that collaboration, and that's why I always get kind of, I don't know, when people start giving, well, you know, Kirby did this and Stan did that, and it's like, we'll never know, because there were, you know, Steve didn't talk and Jack wouldn't talk, and Stan didn't remember.
Well, Jack would talk, but it would depend, because if he was mad at Stan, Stan was the worst human being on the planet. And if he liked Stan, you know, if he and Stan were getting along, Stan made his work better. It depended on when you talked to Kirby. Kirby was very passionate, and you know, one of the big interview that everybody points to in the Comics Journal was actually done at the peak of when Kirby was fighting with Marvel for his art. And Jack never quite grasped the fact that Stan was not completely in charge. You know, he, like when he didn't get his contract and his raise, he blamed Stan, even though Martin Goodman was the one he was negotiating with. When he didn't get his art back, he blamed Stan, even though Stan was out in LA and had nothing to do with Marvel at the time. He was barely reading the books from time to time. So,
well, Vox puts an interesting spin on that, because they say in 1966 there was an article by Nat Friedland from the New York Herald Tribune, who basically, despite when Lee himself said in the article he wasn't involved as some of the others in the company title, he basically wrote up Stan like Stan was Marvel.
Yep.
Totally ignoring everything else. And Mark Avanier talks about how Kirby, he said the article did enormous damage to Jack personally and professionally.
Yep.
And I guess I'm still kind of naive. I guess I don't get. Personally, I could understand. I don't understand professionally, because he's still Jack. The comic industry was so small back then. Who outside of the comics would that matter to? There were only...
But the thing to remember was, when Jack came to Marvel, for all the talk and bluster, he came hat in hand. DC would not hire him. DC had cut his contract. He didn't want to move out to L.A. to work for Western, which was being distributed by Dell. It was either Marvel or Carlton. And Carlton was pretty scummy. And what Jack wanted was, he wanted, if they're going to write up what we do in the paper, I want some credit. And the article made him look like, he's just the art monkey.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I'm just reading about the article.
Yeah. And Stan does everything, and these artists do what he says. Yeah. Well, there was already, he already had a bad reputation over at DC because of suing one of the editors. So he probably took it very personally. Because here he is, Stan's going, all right, in the next issue we're going to do this. And Jack would, pace it out and draw it and bring it in, and Stan would put in, and Jack would even put, on the sides of the art, what's going on, so that if Stan needed help with the dialogue, there it is, and then in this article in the paper, it's, and the Stan does everything, and the artists just draw the stories. And another thing that I keep hearing is, well, Stan didn't give credit. If you listen to any interview, Stan did. I remember when he was on Larry King. I actually watched Larry King because Stan Lee was on it. And he kept trying to give credit to the artists, and Larry King would cut him off. Until finally Stan said, look, I didn't do this stuff on my own. I had wonderful creators who helped me along, who did this. You've got to give credit to Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and Don Heck. And it's hard for people to understand that, because if you're not in comics, you barely have a comprehension of what a writer does and what an artist does. It's, until Stan, it was just comics were just there. There weren't credits. It was just,
and if you're not sure about that, look at some of the Golden and Silver Age boards, where they're still to this day trying to figure out who did the artwork. There are some books they're like, well, it kind of looks like this artist, but we don't know, because nobody kept records of it. And it wasn't something you came out and said, yeah, I draw comic books for a living. You would probably, well, yeah, I just, I work at magazine or whatever. Because it was not
commercial art. That's what a lot of the artists would say. I work in commercial art.
Yeah, because it wasn't a big, I don't know. Again, it's all interesting to me historically, because I grew up very naive about creators. I mean, I saw that they were there, and I'm trying to think of that. I think John Byrne was quite possibly the first creator that I actually recognized by name, with George Perez coming quite after that. And then as I went on in the 80s, you start realizing, oh, well, Steve Ditko did the book, the Spider-Man book, and now he's doing some stuff in, what was it, Marvel Spotlight? He came back, did some stuff, and
yeah.
Jack Kirby was doing stuff, and then I saw what he was doing at DC, and I was like, not really into that. And he came back, did some stuff at Marvel, and I was like, he really changed from I liked his stuff better when he was doing Fantastic Four. Not realizing, what those books covered up to, Fantastic Four 15? And they were still hundreds of issues to go beyond that, and you see as his art changed and became just universal. You know, I could see Spider-Man swinging down an alley. When Kirby drew something, I could see the universe that he was drawing. You know, so it was a slow thing. That's why when I go back and I read articles like, well, it damaged Kirby, and I'm kind of like, I can't see anything like that happening today, because if somebody came up and said, well, I did this, somebody else would correct them right away.
Yeah.
It wasn't so widespread. And, well, like you said, you know, it's the way people, the way they would view Stan Lee. I mean, I got to give my wife geek credits, because, you know, when I tell her, hey, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, she knows who I'm talking about, because she understands. And part of it could be from just us talking. I have no idea when she talks to me about comics. Pleasantly surprised. But, you know, when I was trying to explain, well, you know, Stan would give a plot, Jack would go out and draw it, and then Stan would fill in the word balloons, and there might have been some contention between, like, well, this is what Kirby meant, but this is what Stan wrote. But it worked. It's out there.
Well, you know who else works pretty hard, Joe?
Larry the Axe Henning, because he's coming back at Wicked Wart Brewery, but it'll be this Saturday. I'm still working.
No, it's these guys, our sponsors. That's right. Here at the Solitaire Rose Radio Network, we have ads, and our first sponsor is me. That's right, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. I have my first book out with Dangerous Dan Moore. It's the first 100 strips of our online web strip, Worldwide News, the story of the lowest rated cable news network. And you can get yourself a copy with commentary, with all sorts of extras, with signatures and everything. Just email Dan over at lordshadowflame@gmail.com. Our top sponsor, who's been with us since day one, is DreamHost. DreamHost.com. You need yourself a website, and DreamHost.com is the #1 web host in the whole known universe. Just head over to DreamHost.com, put in the code KRAYZ, K-R-A-Y-Z, get $20 off your first year. How can you beat that? Our other sponsor is Graze, GRAZE.com. Healthy snacks for a healthy lifestyle. Just head over to Graze, put in the code CORYS3R5P. Your first and fifth box are free. You can get them weekly. You can get them bi-weekly. You can get them monthly. You can just order a whole bunch of them. It's great stuff to keep you away from the vending machine at work. Now, if you would like to leave a comment for any of the podcasts that we do, we'd love those. Go ahead and email us at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, or you can call 952-856-0519. Operators are standing by. Okay, it's just a place that will record your calls, but we'll play them on the air. We'll answer your questions. We love getting feedback. Tell us what you think. Ask a question. Suggest a topic. Be a guest. Send us your stuff. solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com. If you would like to advertise on any of the Solitaire Rose radio shows, you can. Just email us at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com. Subject advertising. Thanks.
Hooray!
And I work pretty hard too.
You do?
Yes, we've got 3 podcasts dropping this week. One of which is an interview with creators from Ahoy Comics. I got Tom Payer and Stuart Moore. And I got to sit down with them and talk about the stuff coming out from Ahoy Comics. So here's me talking about what's coming up. The Solitaire Rose Podcast Network is filled with all kinds of audio goodness. First, there's Crazy Comics and Stories. It's been going since 2010. It drops every Monday, and it has me, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard, and Joe Crazy Writer talking comics, shenanigans, and whatever we're freaking and geeking about. Every Monday morning. It's been going since 2010, and it's available at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. Also on that same feed is the Solitaire Rose Podcast, which is me, again, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard, doing interviews, talking about comics history, pretty much talking about whatever I want to talk about. We've also got Solo Joe, where Joe Crazy Rider does a solo podcast, and he hasn't done one in a while, so kick him in the shins to get him started. We also, on that same feed, have Solitaire Rose Series and Review, where we do DVD commentary of older comic book series. That's all at crazycomics.solitairerose.com. I also do a podcast with Wolfie B. Bad at badadvice.solitairerose.com, where we take listener questions and give them bad advice. There's also Novelcast, where I take the novels I've written and turn them into free audiobooks. That's at novels.solitairerose.com. There's also Fantastic Forecast, where myself and Adam Vermillion are going through the entire run of the Fantastic Four, 4 issues at a time. That's fantasticforecast.solitairerose.com. And if you think that I'm on all of these podcasts, you're wrong, because Scrabbling Across the West is at scrabbling.solitairerose.com, where musician Dave Cofell and his wife Stephanie travel across America and then sitting down to play Scrabble and talk about the day. That's at Scrabbling Across the West, scrabbling.solitairerose.com. There are always more podcasts at the Solitaire Rose Podcast Network. Be there. Aloha. And now that we're done with my plugs, we get to Joe's favorite part of the show. No, not where he shotguns McDonald's strawberry preserves in a tube.
I bought a shot of shotgun.
It's Joe talking about what's going on the eBays. Joe?
For approximately 14 more days, because I have come to the conclusion there is no effing way I'm going to be able to do eBay after my hip operation. It's going to be I will not be mobile. It'll be too painful. And when this drops, you folks got like a week to look at whatever's on the eBays. And I've been putting stuff up because this is kind of my last hurrah. Matter of fact, today I did a last hurrah and put probably the last batch of stuff up on eBay, and including a copy of Avenging Spider-Man #9. Cory, tell the good people what's so spectacular about that.
Ooh, I don't know what's so spectacular about Avenging Spider-Man #9.
You don't know why I sold it for $150, even though it's going for about $200 on eBay? Even though it was published in 2012? It is the first time Carol Danvers calls herself Captain Marvel.
Oh, okay.
And believe me, I put it up. I bundled it with 9 and 10, thinking, well, you know, everybody else is selling them singly and they're being slabbed and stuff. And somebody offered me $150. I said, fine, it's gone. That's the way I work. Some other fun things I sold. I sold the Last Avenger story, which is from '94 by Peter David and Ariel Olivetti.
Ariel Olivetti.
Yep. I sold a Marvel Premiere #5, but it was only in good shape, so that one only went for $3. A couple Simpson comics. Now that the line's over, there seems to be a lot of heat going in on them. The Treehouse of Horrors, one of the Summer Shindigs. In non-comic related stuff, I actually sold something from my old Hot Comics. It was a Transformer 6-car spy charger set, imported in 2000. I'll get it out yet. And it was just little tiny Matchbox card size things. And I looked online and I'm like, whatever, I'll just put it up for what I bought it for. And it done sold. And then, of course, the one I talked about earlier, the Marvel 75th anniversary celebration, I had one for $15 that was signed by Paulo Riviera, who obviously must have done something in it. But it sold right away. And I'm curious now. One of the things I was telling Cory, I said, what is the first appearance of Spider-Gwen?
I know it was in the Spider-Verse. The
Yep,
Spider-Verse
I
story.
believe it's the second one.
Yes.
And what's happened now is that comic, because of Stan Lee passing away, has popped up to like about $100 plus comic. Some people are asking as high as $800. I don't know if it's going for that high. But that tells you how fast things can move, because I didn't even think to jack the price up. I just sold it, and it's long gone. So here's your last chance to take a look on the eBay, see what I've got, see what you want. By the way, the first Spider-Gwen, I believe, was Edge of the Spider-Verse #2.
Okay, that's right.
Which is already a very expensive comic. I say that because I was looking for it, figuring, I might as well flip it. And I think I probably blew it out last year with the big purge sale. So when you get a chance, check it out, because I will shut it down. So you'll be listening to this on the 19th, and I will probably shut it down on the 26th, because I got all sorts of fun things to go. But I'll talk about that when we get into our favorite topics coming up.
Our favorite topics?
Yeah. Freaking and geeking.
That's not how I introduced freaking.
I know, but I thought I would just cut to the quick and go right to it.
Fine. What are you freaking on?
Fine. Oh, you'll miss me when I'm gone. Anyways.
I miss everybody when they're gone.
Freaking is just
not when they're here.
Not too much going on. I mean, I just had my final run with the doctor, and they gave me I got to make a list of all this stuff I've got to do, because it's like, okay, I got to stop taking ibuprofen and aspirin a week before the surgery, which is 22nd. I've got to stop taking my rheumatoid medicine for 1 week before, 2 weeks after. They have this specialized soap that they have you wash 2 days before, including the day of.
You got to wash your ass.
And you can't get it in your hair, on your face, or on your genitals, because it kills any of the bacteria there, and there's friendly bacteria in those 3 places that they don't want gone, because it's all about stopping an infection. I actually had to get a nose swab. They have there's a virus that lives in like 1 in 4 Americans' nose that can cause serious infections when you have surgery, because you wipe your hand on your nose, and now you scratch yourself and your incision, and boom, you get a life-threatening incision. So I remember reading about this 4 years ago, and they said if they just would test for it, they could put a drug in there to kill that before. And apparently I don't have it, because I did the nose swab earlier today, and they said they'd call back if they had it, because again, there's another med they have to do. But they kind of give me an idea what's going on. I'll find out when I have the actual operation a day before, other than doing it on the 29th. But there's like, okay, stop eating here, stop drinking then, don't bring any of this in. Before you leave, we'll give you tons of stuff. It's looking like I will probably be in the hospital overnight because of I love this word. They're going to have to chisel away some of my bone. Cory, they're going to chisel me.
They're going to chisel your bones.
Because some of the rheumatoid is trying to grow around the bad cartilage, or if there is any cartilage, and he's got to chisel it out. I'll be out, but it just means when I wake up, I'm going to be really friggin' sore. So, but as of the 29th, I get cut open. The 4th, I'll be in the physical therapist getting physically therapied. So I'll be it's quick and ready to go. I actually talked with a friend of mine last night, and they were she was telling me, she was in like for a whole week because she had complications, and hopefully I don't have complications, but we'll see. It's just it's right now, it's like I'm on the incline of a roller coaster going up, and I'm just waiting to go over the top and run my way down. With that freaking me out, I really don't have anything else to freak out about. Cory, what are you freaking out on?
I've got all kinds of stuff.
Go for it.
The first thing is, one of my traditions is the MST3K Turkey Day Marathon. They've actually brought it back a few years ago, and they run it on the Shout TV app, and they run it on Pluto TV, and there are other online ways you can see it. And every year, for I would say the past 4 or 5 years, I have made the Thanksgiving dinner at the group home, left there, stopped at the Minnesota's largest candy store for their last weekend, and picked up my candy to get me through, and a pie or two, and then I come home, and by noon they're starting the Mystery Science Theater 3000 marathon for my Turkey Day enjoyment. But no, this year because they are dropping a new season of Mystery Science Theater 3000 on Thanksgiving, the Turkey Day Marathon will be Sunday. I work Sunday, so I will not get to see it. It's okay. It's okay. I also complain about this every year. Joe, when did Survivor Series used to run?
I thought it was on Thanksgiving.
Nope, it was always the night before Thanksgiving.
Oh, that's right. They always had the big turkey dinner, which ended up just being a big-ass fight.
Yep. No longer. Nope. Survivor Series is the Sunday before. So the Sunday before Thanksgiving, there's a lot of TV I'm not going to be able to watch because I'm working. And recording a second episode of the Fantastic Forecast. But, yep. So, yep, Survivor Series got moved and years ago and still haven't moved it back. Over in comics, DC's New Age of Heroes, all those heroes that spun out of DC Metal. Yeah, they're crashing and burning, being canceled, and it looks like that little vanity line is dying. So hope you weren't too mentally invested in that. It's one of the reasons why when comic companies say, hey, we have an all-new line of books, I just kind of go, okay, I'll ignore it and it'll go away. Looking at you, Marvel 2099. I'm looking at you, Marvel Tech. I'm looking at you. Boy, DC is sending out the mixed messages on the Black Label stuff. Because, okay, Batman Damned did really great. And then you read all of these things about how, oh, they're cutting back on the Black Label line because of all the pushback on Batman Damned. And a lot of the stuff that they were going to do for Black Labels getting rethought and everything. But then in the new previews, oh, no, it's next month. Oh, look, we're putting out all these trade paperbacks from the past. They're now moved to Black Label. Joe, did you know that Batman Dark Knight is a Black Label book?
Well, he was standing naked on top of the bat stairway.
See?
The bat butt.
And All-Star Superman, that was a Black Label book.
Oh, that explains a lot.
So, yeah, kind of annoying about that sort of thing. So, Joe, what are you geeking on?
Let's see. I was going to mention there's a shop up in Forest Lake that's celebrating its first year anniversary called Remix. Records, comics, collectibles, boutique items. And I ran up there because they were doing a buy one, get one free sale on comics. And I looked around the CD. That's where I saw that the two Captain America movies on the disc. And they're up in Forest Lake. And it was fun. I got in the mood. I kind of dug through a lot of books and just was looking through stuff. And picked up some reading stuff, picked up some things to sell. Like one of my buds at work is really big on, I corrupted him. He was the guy I bought the Infinity Gauntlet for, and now he's voraciously reading comics. And I found a copy of What If the Hulk Went Berserk, number 45, because he wanted a decent Hulk-Thor fight. This is the only one I could think of that was actually interesting, because that was Thor ended up killing him.
One of the things about that, I remember when it came out, is a What If Hulk Went Berserk? Well, it'd be kind of a regular issue of the Hulk now, wouldn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. If you read that last issue, oof, I'll get to that in a minute. Some of the other things, I just picked up reading stuff. Like I found a copy of the Star Trek X-Men Next Generation Second Impact comic book. Captain America, Peggy Carter, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., X-Men Unlimited, number 36, which got Kitty Pryde and I can't remember the name of her dragon. Lockheed. They're sitting outside the Dean of Students. So, Black Cat miniseries that Van Meter Peludo did. I believe that was the. Was that the Lady Death guy? I'll have to look later. Brian Peludo. Just things like that. A couple copies of What the. And, of course, the Sandman oversized special that came out a while back during Kirby's 100th. Because it has like Jurgens, all sorts of people doing Sandman stuff, including a classic Kirby story. So got me some good reading. As if that wasn't enough, Cory, do you remember who Kathy Coleman is?
Yes, she was Holly on Land of the Lost.
And she wrote a book.
You seem to be obsessed with her lately.
I am. I have been, because I feel bad I didn't just call off sick and go to Milwaukee and hang with those guys. They actually did a fantastic job of posting things as the con went on. It's the first time a convention like that's happened, and I actually felt a part of it because people were posting pictures and things like that. So anyways, oh wow, there's a little flip-it book where I think his name was Junior, the little dinosaur. He kind of opens his mouth and closes as you're flipping down the cover. But I went to my my favorite shop downtown, the Subtext bookstore. I actually called my daughter and said, next time you're in, would you ask him to order me a book? And she said, you can do that online. So I sent him a note. I gave him the title, the author, and I actually had the ISBN number. And they texted me back, okay, we'll order it and call you. And 3 days later, it was in. So I have that ready to read. I have no doubt, judging that I have had surgery before during my comic book reading days, way back in high school. And let me tell you, when you're sucking cheese and taking drugs, reading is probably the last thing you want to do. I will probably come back with oodles of things I will have watched. And I've mentioned things like we've been watching Monty Python, we've been watching Twilight Zone episodes. It's actually kind of fun when you recognize like some of the actors that went on to become more famous later on. So I am reading stuff at a voracious level right now, and I found I picked this up at one of the cons, but we've talked about it in the past. World of Krypton, the miniseries that launched miniseries.
Yeah.
And it holds up fairly well. It was a lot of fun reading, and I love things like that where they kind of tied in all the goofy Superman stuff and made it into a fairly decent story. Back issue number 108 was an all Aquaman issue, and it was kind of neat because it covered not just the Silver Age, but it went into some of the 80s, 90s stuff that Peter David did, and including Aqualad and things like that. And part of the fun is you're reading this and you're like, I remember reading this, or oh, I don't have those anymore, I want to reread them. So just a good issue, covering the post and pre-crisis Aquaman. I read a graphic novel called The Time Traveling Tourist, published by, might be self-published. I don't see any logo. Time Traveling Tourist, published by Beyond Reality Media, written by William Gratz and Richard Gray. Gonzalo Martinez did the art, and basically it's a guy's got a time traveling mechanism, and he's using it to go take selfies of himself on the moon, taking selfies when he kind of disturbs Michelangelo when he's trying to paint the Mona Lisa. He gets a picture of himself on the Titanic, and then of course he makes a mistake and falls in love with the woman that he gets donuts from. And of course, to them, he's showing up every half hour buying bags of donuts. Never mind that he's been gone months doing all these touristy things. And of course, as every good book is wont to do, there are mysterious figures after him. Who do you think could be after somebody running through time taking posters of pictures with? And when he finally does take his girlfriend with him, what do you think she does when she's back in time? Go read the book. I'm not going to tell you. Maybe next week, because this is just a new graphic novel. I picked up a series from Vanity Publishing called The Complete Our Valued Customer by Tim Chamberlain.
Yes, I love that book.
What fun is this? Basically, this is why I wish I could draw, because what this guy did is he was able to score himself a job at a comic store. And what he did is, as different people would come in, he'd take a backing board and he'd draw a picture of the customer that just went through. For example, It Begins. There's a picture of a guy wearing a coat with spectacles and butt teeth, and he goes, "Do not touch my comics with your hands while you ring them up, as that's sure to decrease their value." And then, of course, there was a girl who come in and goes, while discussing why she doesn't like superhero comics, "Do you ever wonder why there aren't more vegan superheroes?" And this guy's got over 300 pages with like 4 strips on a page full of just different reactions of customers coming through. I don't recall for the life of me that varied amount of customers or just weird things that people said. So maybe it's a good thing I can't draw. But it was a lot of fun to read. And if you can pick it up, it just came out. Let's see. I got some number ones here. I'll just kind of flip through quick. Because like I said, I read a lot of comics, but there's only a few that we've probably never talked about. For example, the last Simpsons comic, number 245. A lot of fun, a lot of cross references, a lot of Life is Hell, bunnies. And plus, they do something that's fun. They have every single Simpson comic pictured and on the back couple pages. So a good send out for Bongo Comics. I read Battlestar Galactica 00 because there's already been a 0. And this is the classic ones. It's only 35 cents, so you get a chance to pick it up and see if you like the story, like the art. And it's just a little bit of a teaser because the main series is starting up probably later this month. So that was fun. In the Vertigo line, Books of Magic and Lucifer came out. I'm picking up all 4 of them. I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I'm going to hang on the fence to buy these, or maybe I'll just drop and do graphic novels on them. Books of Magic starts out kind of interesting because Tim knows he's supposed to be this grand magic guy. He just is upset because he's not doing any magic. So apparently Books of Magic, or the miniseries, happened, but anything else that's happened previously didn't. So this is like a fresh start for Tim, other than the fact he knows he's supposed to be this great magician. He just is frustrated because he can't quite get it to work right. In Lucifer, as far as I can tell, he's homeless and nuts. And obviously, there's more to be told there because there's a lot of people that are not happy that Lucifer is loose. And again, these are both setup issues, and so far they're pretty strong. And I'm actually, like I said, I'll read them around for a while and see if I hang with them. Another number 1 from Image, Exo Sisters. 2 sisters, their job is to deal with, well, I don't know. The first issue starts where at a wedding, all of a sudden the groom gets taken away by a demon, which really freaks out the bride nevertheless. So she calls the Exo Sisters. One of them is kind of a prim proper down-to-earth person. The other one decided to just crack at the unused champagne at the dinner table. So that gives you an idea what's going on with the sisters. They figure out the first case. It's a good done in one. It's got a little cliffhanger. And one of my favorite all-time story done by one of my favorite creators, Tony Isabella, was reprinted in True Believers #1. Well, it's a #1, but it's a what if Spider-Man had rescued Gwen Stacy, the most eagerly what if of all. And believe me, at the time it was. And Tony Isabella wrote it. Gil Kane, Frank Giacoria are the artists. Just fantastic story. And why? Well, I probably know why. They haven't talked to Tony and said, hey, would you do a sequel to this? Because it ends up, you know, he's hunted, he's alone, he can't get to his costume, he can't get to his web shooters. The crux of the matter, and again, how long is this? What are we talking here? 40 years these comics have been out?
Yeah.
So the crux of the matter is that the Green Goblin, right before he got defeated, and this is Norm, sends the incriminating photos of Spider-Man as Peter Parker to J. Jonah Jameson, who crashes the wedding right after Peter and Gwen say I do. And of course, Spider-Man's wanted at the time. Aunt May has a heart attack. Peter Parker, of course, escapes because he's Spider-Man. Who's going to stop him? Jonah's, of course, high on the hog. Everybody else is pissed at him. So a troubled man stands and broods with the fate of society at stake. What will his decision be? Only time will tell. Time and the Watcher. Well, he's dead, so maybe Tony or the Nick Fury will tell us. So, a lot of fun, a lot of excitement going on. I did have something else I was going to say, but whatever. We'll figure it out later. Cory, what you geeking on? What got you? Oh, I know what it was. I was just looking up prices. Apparently, on November 12th, every single copy of Marvel 25th Anniversary Celebration #1 was swept off of eBay, ranging anywhere from 1 cent to $4. And of course, my sign was 15. And now, of course, they're all on eBay's for as high as $700. The only one I seen that might have been worth something was the one signed by Stan Lee and Romita. So, again, as with the Bat Prick comic, which I'm going to call it from now on, if you're looking to sell it, you might as well sell it because it probably isn't going to be published anymore. At least not from what, like you were saying, Cory. Maybe they'll come out with it. Who knows? But you got to be careful because when things are hot, you definitely want to sell them. When they're not, or you just don't care, which is why I sold The Avenging Spider-Man, because I can not only read it on Marvel Unlimited, but I can pick it up in the graphic novel. Or in 40 years, pick it up as a true believer. Cory, what you geeking on?
Comic-wise, I've only read one thing.
I'm shocked you read that many the way you've been so busy.
But I've read 4 of the trade paperbacks. I am reading Palmiotti and Gray's Jonah Hex. Now, Jonah Hex was DC's lone Western character that survived through the 70s and even into the 80s. Jonah Hex is a bounty hunter who was horribly scarred. And he started in a comic called Weird Western Tales, got his own book, and was written by Michael Fleischer for the most part and drawn by Tony DeZungia for the most part. And it was, when it was created, it was kind of looking at the change in the Westerns as in the 60s we got more of the spaghetti Westerns, which were rougher, they were more violent, they were more amoral than the old-fashioned, you know, this guy wears a white hat, this guy wears a black hat, you can tell who the bad guy is. Gray and Palmiotti were asked to create a Jonah Hex book before the disastrous movie came out. And the book actually lasted, I think, 75 issues? Something like that. But I was able to pick up the entire run of trade paperbacks, dirt cheap, and now I am finally getting a chance to read through them. And if you can pick them up, do so. These are fantastic comics. And even if you're digging through the discount bins and you see an issue of Jonah Hex from the 2000s, they're all pretty much done in one. And this is such a great comic. Tony DeZungia does some stories. There are a lot of great artists walking through and doing stuff, but Palmiotti and Gray really sort of nail that idea. They read like spaghetti westerns. It's an amoral West. Jonah Hex is a bounty hunter who very rarely gives a damn about more than anything than money. And just fantastic, fantastic comics. I saw some of the stuff that Marvel is going to be putting out for their 80th anniversary. Joe, have you ever heard of Ziggy Pig and Silly Seal?
Not until I read about it.
That was Marvel's big funny animal book that wasn't owned by somebody else. They are bringing them back.
Hot damn.
And I am excited about it because I like the fact that they're going back and going, yeah, we did more than superheroes. I've talked relentlessly about the Atlas books being much better than people believed. Yeah, some of the stories are goofy, but a lot of them are drawn by really good artists, and they're decent little horror stories. Or the Marvel superhero reboot that happened in the 50s. Those were really good. it's very different from what you're used to with the superhero book. But come on, the Captain America stories were drawn by a very young John Romita. And the Submariner stuff was still done by Bill Everett. And a lot of great stuff from Marvel. And I'm happy that they're going to be reprinting a lot of that stuff. And the final thing I am geeking on, I actually alluded to it in my freaking. On Thanksgiving Day, they're dropping 6 new episodes of Mystery Science Theater 3000. And it's not called season whatever, I don't know, 12. They're calling it The Gauntlet. And the reason is because Pearl and TV's son of TV's Frank are going to be forcing Jonah and the bots to watch 6 movies in a row without a break. Now, you can take a break if you want, but they're not getting one.
Oh.
And they've announced the movies. There is one that I cannot wait to watch. I will probably, if it's not the first one in the list, I'll watch it out of order anyway. And that is, Joe, a little cinematic joy called Mac and Me. Now, I don't know how big you were into crappy movies in the 80s. Did you ever watch The Mac and Me?
I don't think so.
Mac and Me was an E.T. ripoff that McDonald's bought a lot of placement time in. So remember how E.T. liked the Reese's Pieces?
Mm-hmm.
Mac liked the McDonald's cheeseburgers. And scenes take place at McDonald's, and oh man, this is worse than in The Golden Child where they have a Pepsi can dance for 5 minutes. This is some painful crap because the movie is cheap and ugly, and oh look, there's McDonald's. So I am looking forward to that. Oh, also, Joe, I doubt you'll want to go because we've talked about it a little bit, but I have the night off for when NXT comes to St. Paul.
Which is?
It is December 7th.
Good luck with that. I'll probably be high on hip balls.
Which is the Roy Wilkins Auditorium. I thought they'd torn that down.
No, they refurbished it.
Is it still horribly uncomfortable?
I haven't. No, actually, it isn't.
Because I actually saw a WWE event there back in the 90s that became kind of famous, frighteningly. Because it was Brian Pillman's last match before he died.
I saw the infamous AWA match where Hulk Hogan was up against Nick Bockwinkel and won the title only to be overturned by Stanley Blackburn. Because apparently Bobby Heenan threw brass knuckles in the ring. Bockwinkel missed him. Hogan picked him up, smacked the champ, and they wouldn't let the belt change on that. And as we all know, the plan was they were going to fight across territories, but apparently Hulk had a better offer.
Gosh, I wonder who gave him a better offer.
Boy, who knows?
Whatever happened to Hulk Hogan anyway?
Didn't he? No, that was Stone Cold Steve Austin. He did a reality
show, didn't he?
I think Stone Cold Steve Austin got to give the stunner to the president, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
I'm mixing up something. I don't know.
Well, believe it or not, kids, you have listened to us blather on about Stan Lee for an hour and a half.
And our good friend Dave, and comics, and Jack, and Stan, and just the bloody universe that these boys made for us.
And as we say every week, the comic we like least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most. Joe?
I used to think what I did was not very important. People are building bridges and engaging in medical research, and here I was doing stories about fictional people who do extraordinary things, crazy things, and wear costumes. But I suppose I have to come to realize that entertainment is not easily dismissed. Stan Lee, hit my music.